Who took the worst loss? Define it however you want. We've got a ton of teams, like a ton of ranked teams took losses. You could argue that maybe even there were some unranked teams that lost games where based on what was going on with their season, the loss was potentially devastating. So who do you think took the worst loss of week 10?
Clemson. Just because I feel like that would have been a game to where if you beat Louisville, like Louisville's a solid bowl team at worst, and now you lose at home, multiple scores, I think it hurts their resume a pretty good bit, right? Like for them to go out and lay an egg like that. I think Clemson is probably the most like impactful loss in terms of changing up your season. Them or, well, I'll circle back around to me if nobody says it.
Yeah, I've got more on that, but I want to hear some other answers. But
I
got thoughts on Clemson too.
I got two candidates. I would say doesn't have an impact on their season as far as what they could. It does. I would say Nebraska losing to UCLA was a pretty horrible loss for that coaching regime right now for what they're trying to do. Like you're coming in home on a losing streak. You lost to Indiana, you lost to Ohio State. You come home to face the UCLA team that you feel like you should be beating, and you lose at home, and that's not good for where that program's trying to get. But then I think Penn State's loss sucked, and I know that they're still alive for the playoff. I know that they're still alive in the Big Ten, even though they've kind of lost a pretty key tiebreaker in that aspect. But like I don't disagree with the point you made the other night, Bud, about Penn State and what their expectations are, but I think their expectations should be to compete for national titles. Like in this age with the expanded playoff, and with the way the money situation works now between the Big Ten and the SEC and everybody else and NIL, Penn State should be competing for national titles. It's a blue chip ratio team. So realistically, it has the roster talent and the ability to do it. But just the psyche aspect of their confidence in that, like we've talked about, like that was the most vulnerable Ohio State they've probably seen in the James Franklin tenure. And Ohio State tried to give them the game. There was the pick six early. There was the fumble at the goal line that ended up as a touchback. Spotted him a 10-0 lead. Left a touchdown on the board. And you still lost at home. And your offense, despite all the changes you've made, still stunk when it mattered the most. It's just from a confidence standpoint, I just feel like that's a killer. Like even if they end up getting an at-large bid, how can you have any kind of belief in yourself to go win any of those games?
Tom, just a couple 50-50 calls, that game unfolds differently. You know, that's what James Franklin says. You know, it's just a couple 50-50 calls, go your way. I don't think it was that devastating. And because of the relative of the conversation we're having with other teams, I thought it was a rough loss. I thought it was demoralizing the way they couldn't convert on the 4 downs from inside the 5. And then the way that Ohio State turned around and drained the clock and just moved the ball at will and ended the game that way, I thought was completely demoralizing. But I still think if you get a home playoff game and if you get a win in the playoffs, you know, that record's still there. It still looms, but you're feeling pretty good about the season. Now they have to go do that. And there's definitely concerns about them, but I don't think it's up there as one of the losses because of what they can still do. And what's crazy is that there was a bunch of people in the chats putting the bad losses. There were a lot of them, a lot of bad losses. Kansas State was the first one that came to mind because of playoff implications. Big 12 felt like Kansas State was just exactly where they needed to be. You throw in the fact that Avery Johnson had 2 picks and we're just raving about Will Howard and what he's meant for Ohio State. That has to sting a little bit more. A couple people remind us of Wisconsin, like Luke Fickell getting beat down from Iowa 42-10. That is a bad loss. USC, Florida State. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of bad losses this week. A lot of bad losses.
I didn't get a chance to watch USC Washington on Saturday. So going back, number one, y'all had pointed out the inability to move the ball until you started running and how late it was to actually go to running the football. But I didn't even get to see that final sequence to see how close USC was to winning the game in total scoring position. And it just ends up with Miller Moss running for his life. A failed 4th down. Like it was just a comedy of errors that leaves that USC team at 4-5 overall going into this off week with the worst vibes. They have lost 4 of their last 5, the only win being that game against Rutgers that Tom Fornelli and dozens of others watched in the middle of the night after that World Series game 1. They returned to action, needing 2 of 3 just to be bowl eligible: Nebraska, UCLA, and Notre Dame. That is not guaranteed. This could be a 5-7 Trojans team. That was that one was stunning. On the Clemson note, I don't think it's bad for season implications. I think it's bad for program implications.
Right. Big picture.
Yeah, I like fans booing the team and the coach in Death Valley at night, heading for the exits before the end of the game. You were a double-digit favorite and you lost by 12. The decision-making along the way, like I just did that I've referenced often. My friend Joe Giglio, he's got the "F you, we're still Clemson" phrase that like Clemson often, even when you think they're shaky, they get those opponents, especially in the ACC, and they just bow up on them. Like that's the kind of loss that like kind of makes you step back from thinking that they still have that gear right now. And like, because you also saw it from the Louisville fans who've been like, our entire ACC lives, we haven't been able to do this. You know, like the jubilation. The kings of the ACC are bleeding out right now. And like that one was for like narrative vibes and all the big picture stuff, something that I think was pretty damaging for the Clemson, the Clemson brand, I guess you could say.
You know, it was a devastating loss. My coaches might cost the coach his job. DJ Lagway. Him being lost most likely for the season probably is going to cost Billy Napier his job.
Is he out for the year?
I mean, they were chanting his name and he was carted off. I know it was a hamstring, but feels like it was pretty significant. You know,
it was odd. Obviously, it was a serious injury, but like how many hamstring injuries have you seen carted off?
Never.
Right. Yeah. Like it was a hamstring.
Right. I was shocked when they said hamstring. I thought it was like a neck injury.
Yeah.
But that makes me worry about that it is like completely off the bone, that he'll miss the rest of the year. That's why I'm worried. And maybe Florida fans.
You don't want your hamstring to be like your barbecue.
Right.
Yeah, correct. Clip that.
Yeah. That's Cannibal Tom Fornelli checking in right now on hamstrings.
Simpson voice.
Sorry, bud. Did you have anything else on the Clemson side of things that you wanted to hit?
Not really. Big 12 hurt quite a bit this weekend. Mm-hmm. We thought it would probably come at some point because like when everybody's favored by 3 points every single weekend, like you're eventually going to have some of these results pop up. But like Kansas State losing to Houston it's a pretty bad loss. I mean, Iowa State at home to Texas Tech, I guess somewhat of a bad loss, but nobody's just that much better than everybody else in this league. Like even more than we kind of said it, we believed it, and it was also a bit, but like even more than I could have realized. Like, good God.
Navy's lost to Rice is horrendous.
Yeah.
That's a really good one.
And Memphis lost to UTSA. Memphis had like a somewhat path to be able to back their way into the American Athletic Conference title game, and because they already had the loss to Navy, but I think they might have handed that back with the loss to UTSA.
It really feels like boys your army now.
Yeah, I would agree with that.